What was the goal?
So back then it was, I would say, from 8:30 or 9 o'clock until 11 or 12. And
Okay.
again, I didn't have the skills. So all I had was, if I couldn't set the appointment, I would ask for their email. And then here's what I would do. I would prospect from the morning until about 11 or 12. And then I would, if I had appointments, things like that, I'd go off on those. And then at night, if I had their email, I would come back, and there weren't cell phones with cameras. I had a little Kodak Smart Touch. It was like it looked like it looked like a cell phone. It was about this size, but it was a camera, and I put it on a tripod, and I would just record videos for all the people that I spoke to that morning. And then I had to cut them and edit them. So I was probably from 8 o'clock to maybe midnight. I was doing these videos. I would send them out. And then that would give me a reason to follow up with them the next day. And that's kind of what my system was.
All right, here we go. So here we are, Sohail Salahuddin. Sohail is a realtor in the Chicago area. Welcome everybody to this week's Beyond the Sale podcast. I'm super excited to share Sohail with everybody. Sohail is a high producer realtor, probably sold over thousands of homes in his career in real estate, typically doing 200 to 150 plus homes every year in his market. And I just want to bring him on the podcast to share him with you guys and to see if he can add some value. And I know he will. And and he mentioned to me before we got on the call, no holds bar. I can ask him anything. So here we go. Sohail, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. What's up, everybody? Whoever's watching this, today's Thursday. So happy Thursday. Happy November. Let's go.
Let's do it. Okay. So Sohail, I look at you, and the way we met is through Mike Ferry, and you are the prospector. Man, you are the guy who gets on the phone. And I've learned so much from you, just getting on the phone, grinding, finding leads, making things happen. I guess the word is the rainmaker, right? So just making things happen. So tell me how you got into real estate. Why do you have the affinity to doing it that way? Did you learn that? Is that something that you had to, that you think was just who you are? Like, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think prospecting, is a necessity for anybody. I mean, you have to know how to find where your next transaction is going to come from. But, our job really, when it comes down to it, our job is one thing. It's the acquisition of clients, right? It's the acquisition of new business. And unless you've been in the business for quite some time, or you have some amazing pieces to attract clients and new business, then you have to go after it. And as you and I, John, were taught that prospecting is the fastest way to grow a business, right? Especially if you haven't been in it for a long time and if you haven't built a significant business yet. So just to take you back, and I guess I'll go a little bit beyond the current sale. So I got into real estate because I've had an interesting life. I was raised in a very affluent family. My father did very well. And I'm saying that because I was kind of spoiled. And so what happened was my parents didn't teach me the skills to take care of myself and and finances, all those things. I was never taught those things. And so because I lived in a family where we kind of got whatever we wanted, my siblings and I never had to worry about money until, guess what? Until it was taken away. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. So unfortunately, there was a time in my life when I was, I want to say I was like 19, maybe 20. My mom left my dad, and my dad fell into a deep depression. And I lived in a 6-bedroom house in in a very nice suburb of Chicago. And it was myself and my dad. He fell into a deep depression. He pretty much would come home from work and just go into his room and lock the door and stay there all night. And so we didn't talk much. We didn't talk much, unfortunately. And what ended up happening was he left. He put the home up for sale, and he moved out. And I was there by myself. So think about this: you're an 18, 19-year-old, maybe 20-year-old young man that doesn't know which direction he's going to go in life, and you're by yourself. And so the only thing that I could do was I felt lonely, and I started having friends come over. And then soon enough, my house became the hangout house. And what ended up happening was friends bought friends, and I got into the wrong crowd and went into some very tough times with poor decisions. It relatively changed my life, but for the better. And I went through years of difficult times. I actually ended up going to prison for 2 years. It was the best thing to ever happen to me. It was a blessing. As much as it was probably the worst thing to ever happen to me, it was also the best thing to ever happen to me, because it just changed the way I think about things, changed the way I saw things. I learned to be grateful for everything from fresh air to a bed to being free. And when I was in there, I met a father and son who were very wealthy, and the son was in real estate. And so we would, there's not much to do in there other than just talk. And so we'd sit down, and the dad would tell me stories about his life, and the son would tell me stories about him, and he would tell me how he got into real estate and how he used to go down to the title companies or to the courthouse and search titles and buy properties and all this stuff. And so my background is actually, I have a degree in network engineering, but I knew that I didn't want to do that once I was pulling my life back together. So when I got out, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was sleeping in my friend's 1-bedroom garden apartment, which is like a basement apartment, and I had a mattress on his living room floor. And another friend of mine, because I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, why don't you do mortgages?" And I said, "Well, I don't know how to do them. What do I have to do?" And so it turned out that a mutual friend of ours had a mortgage company, and I went to go work there. And for 3 months, no one taught me anything. I just kind of sat at a desk facing a wall. And I met a woman who's now my wife, but I met her. So my day was spent just kind of listening to people talk on the phones and emailing her back and forth, right? But what happened was I got my first client maybe 3 months after driving an hour to the office, driving an hour there, driving an hour back, not knowing anything. I finally got a lead it was handed to me because nobody else wanted it, of course, right? It was 2 hours away from where I lived. And it was a $100,000 townhome. It was a guy named Darren. We came from opposite ends of the spectrum, like completely. In a normal world, we would probably never meet each other or become friends. But I was hungry, so I took the lead. And for 2 weeks, I was driving. I was doing mortgages. The guy also wanted to buy and get financed. And so in that office was shared with a gentleman who had a real estate company. And it was just him, really. And so what happened was I told him that this guy doesn't have an agent. And I said, "What can I do?" And he's like, "Well, if you go into your real estate school, I'll go with you and we'll split the deal." I said, "Okay, great." He was just helping me. He saw, I think, potential in me. And so he wanted to help. And so I ended up getting into brokers in my broker's class. And I was driving down for two hours there every day. Basically, I'm in Chicago. I would drive down to the border of Indiana and show him $100,000, $110,000 townhomes. Well, he ended up buying one. So I did the mortgage. I got 50% of the real estate transaction. And then I figured it out on my own from there. Then I realized, hey, it's just getting people, finding who needs your help. And from there, that's kind of what I did. A year later, I opened up a mortgage company with a partner. And I think it was a combination of luck and desire to do that. And I found someone, we opened a mortgage company. And by then I had my broker's license. And when I had the mortgage company and I had my broker's license, we were also started working with some developers that were doing condo conversions. And they were big condo conversions. So we're talking 200 to 500 units. And we were involved in it. So it was kind of good times because we were providing the financing and we were listing them and we were representing the buyers, and the developers were also giving us a cut of the profit on the sale. So it was really good times. So, they say you're a dual agency, you're double ending the deal. We were quadruple ending it in a way. And it was my partner and I. And then what happened, John, is 2007 came and then things started changing. And when things started changing, my partner and I started having issues. Typically that's what happens. You start to blame each other and you don't come together. Unfortunately, we started falling apart. And at the same time, I accidentally fell into a real estate brokerage, and I'll just tell you how that happened. So I was having lunch one day with an attorney after a closing, He was the attorney for the closing. And in one of the condo projects that we were doing, as I mentioned, we represented the buyer who happened to be investors, because when you convert an apartment building to condo in the state of Illinois, you have to give them a minimum of 30 days right of refusal, because there's already tenants in this apartment building. And so when these investors, it just attracted a lot of investors. So the investors wanted the tenants in there so they would buy them. And then when a tenant would move out, they would call me and I would find them a new tenant for free because I sold it to them. And so during this lunch, one of the investors called me and he said, "Hey, my tenant's leaving. Can you find me a new tenant?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "I'll put I'll ad in the paper this weekend." Well, what happened was that attorney's like, "Hey, how much do you charge them?" Because he overheard the conversation. And I said, "Well, nothing, because, I sold it to them." And he was like, "Yeah, but your obligation's over." He's like, "There's companies that charge for that." And I didn't know anything about it. So I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "What do they charge?" He said, 1 month's rent. So I said, "Okay." So the next time someone called me, just happened to be a lot of apartments were going vacant. I said, "I can find you a tenant, but I got to charge you 1 month's rent." And that person said, "Yeah, I don't care. I just don't want a vacant apartment." And I said, "Okay." So the next 30 days, I made $10,000 renting apartments. And that attorney, I told him, I'm like, "Hey, thanks so much." I'm like, "Because of you, I made 10 grand renting apartments." And he was like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah." And I'm like, he's like, "How'd you do that?" I'm like, "Just put an ad in the paper," and I was just doing it on the side. And so the next day he called me, he's like, "Can you meet for lunch again?" And I said, "Yeah, let's meet for lunch." And then he presented me with a plan to start doing rentals. And that was 2008. The market crashed. My partner and I were falling apart. And he already had he had his law office, and he had 3 brokers because, when you're an attorney, you can also practice real estate. So he had a small real estate company. And so we put together a plan. We became partners. And from 2008 to 2010, we grew that small office with 3 people to 6 locations, over 300 people. And it did very well. It did very well. Very profitable. It was good times. And then what happened was, of course, 2010, I think, was our peak. And then again, with partners, I found out that, unfortunately, there was money being stolen from the company. And I didn't know because I was never involved in a big business. This is the first time I ever got involved. I never really looked at the books because we were making money, and I thought he was my friend and I trusted him. Well, it turns out him and his partner, his life partner, were funneling money from our corporation into another corporation. That's called piercing the corporate veil. It's illegal. And I got an attorney. We went into a big lawsuit, and it was just draining my savings, and it was hurting the company. And what happened was, I was at the point where I really didn't know what to do. I had a friend of mine named Shirag Shah, who I was in coaching in Tom Ferry back in 2008, 2009, 2010. And I was on the phone with him, and he was like, "Hey, you should talk to a coach named Shaddy." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Just trust me." So I did. And Shaddy was a great coach for me at the time because he coached me through it. And when that phone call, we decided to shut the company down, and I would merge a small team with another real estate company. What ended up happening was I took about 20 or 30 people, shut all of our offices down. I dealt with the liabilities and the consequences later. But we went to Sotheby's, and I started a small team over there. But I was still doing rentals, and the market was changing. Sales were coming back. I didn't really know how to do sales other than just referrals. And so I hired Shaddy as a coach, and he taught me how to prospect. And it took quite some time for me to understand the concept, and I really didn't have the skills back then. I had one line. When I would call people, I would have one line. I would say, "Do you still want to sell?" And they would say yes or no. Regardless of what they said, the next line that I had was, "Well, if you could still sell this home and get the money that you'd want, would that create an issue for you?" Most of the time, they would either say yes or no, but within that year, I think I did over 100 transactions with that one line, and I was sold. Then, of course, 2013 came, and 2014, I think I got what I could out of Shaddy, and he was just a great impact on my life at the time, but I just needed something more. And that's when I found Mike Ferry, and got into Mike Ferry, And then I learned how to really prospect, and I learned the skills. I learned the mindset and so many other things. And it kind of just developed from there.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing. Wow, that's a great story. So from there, Sohail, getting on the phone, transfer over to this new brokerage, Sotheby's. You start making phone calls. What are the lead sources you're beginning with when you're starting to make these sales? I'm assuming they're probably maybe expires and FSBOs, that sort of thing. And yeah, so how did what lead sources were you tapping into?
So it was canceled, expireds, and for sale by owners. That's it.
Canceled, expires, and for sale by owners. Okay, got it. And then in terms of how long you were on the phone every day. I mean, I remember watching you on the phone in the car, on the phone, on the toilet, on the phone everywhere. I mean, how long were you prospecting every day? What was the goal?
So back then it was, I would say, from 8:30 or 9 o'clock until 11 or 12. And again, I didn't have the skills. So all I had was, if I couldn't set the appointment, I would ask for their email. And then here's what I would do. I would prospect from the morning until about 11 or 12. And then I would, if I had appointments, things like that, I'd go off on those. And then at night, if I had their email, I would come back, and there weren't cell phones with cameras. I had a little Kodak Smart Touch. It was like it looked like it looked like a cell phone. It was about this size, but it was a camera. And I put it on a tripod, and I would just record videos for all the people that I spoke to that morning. And then I had to cut them and edit them. So it was probably from 8 o'clock to maybe midnight. I was doing these videos, and I would send them out. And then that would give me a reason to follow up with them the next day. And that's kind of what my system was. And, I was hand dialing because I didn't have a dialer. So I was hand dialing everybody. It was, looking back, I don't know how I did it because it was just crazy.
Yeah, I know. How I started too is very similar. It's, the same as you. It's calling for sale by owners and expireds, and really that was the only lead source, right? And then like just listed, just sold sometimes. But I mean, just getting up and making the calls, and if you don't have the appointment, get on the phone in the afternoon. Sometimes 6 hours a day. I think we at one time made 80, 90 contacts in a day. It's just like, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know how. It's just mentally exhausting now to think about it. But getting started, it's kind of, you just do what you got to do, right?
You do what you got to do. And back then, it wasn't until I got into Mike Ferry, and there was one coach that changed the trajectory of my future from there. So back then, like I said, I didn't have a dialer. I was hand dialing. I didn't have like a ton of canceled expireds, but I did what I could. And I was very much, I'll tell you, I was very much ambitious and motivated. And what I mean by that is what started happening was when I had a coach from Mike Ferry named Ann Baker. And prior to her, I would just take listings anywhere. If it was an hour away, I would take it just because I was hungry, right? And then Ann was like, and she was from the Chicagoland area. And Ann said, "Hey, why are you going all the way to an hour away for a listing appointment?" I said, "Because it's $1 million house." And she's like, "Yeah, but you have $1 million houses all around you." And I didn't understand what she was saying at first. And then I finally understood. And so then she said, "Go door knock them." And that's when kind of I took it to that next level, because I was calling. And then if I couldn't get them on the phone that afternoon, I would go door knock them. And it didn't matter if it was a $6 million, I door knocked $6 million homes. I was green. So I didn't have that experience, that probably, what's the right word for it? Affected me in a negative way. I just didn't,
Sure.
I didn't experience it. So I would go door knock anything. And I remember at Sotheby's, there's hyper-local agents that did specific areas. So if I had a house that was like a $6 million house in a high-end area, and that wasn't an area I worked, I remember walking up to someone. I said, "Hey, I have this person that wants to sell. It's in your neck of the woods. Do you want to come with me?" And she was like, "Yeah, do you have an appointment?" And I said, "No, we're just going to go knock on their door." And she was like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we're just going to knock on the door and see." And that person was like, "I'm not knocking on their door." And I was like, "Why?" And so I just did it myself. And I think once I started getting the negative reactions, it kind of threw me off a little bit, and that plays with your mindset. But I took listings because I didn't know any better. And people saw the fact that you were out there hustling and knocking on their door. And I think that the people who are motivated to sell liked it. And then, of course, the unmotivated people didn't. But, we only want to work with the motivated people. And so that helped me tremendously.
I'm not sure if you noticed this, but I've noticed the same thing with new agents with for sale by owners. And, as they get into the business and they start calling for sale by owners, and they have great luck with them, and they convert them, they sell them, and it makes me go think back that it's been a little while since I listened to the for sale by owner, but go back and be like, wow, like I didn't think you can do that. And I remember when I first started too, like I would take for sale by owner listings, like maybe two a month, one a month, two a month, and it's like, yeah. And you're right. You after time, you get this, you get that reaction, which you really have to guard, that affects your mindset, and you're just like, what, you hear a no, and you say, okay, well, listen, they're not worth it, right? Or I can call something else, or I can dip into something else and make this a lot easier. Yeah. But
I was just going to say, or you get a negative reaction, and you're like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore, because you let that one time affect you, and so, that's something else I had to combat later on. But sorry, go ahead.
And that leads me to the next point. So because I think and I'm not sure, hopefully I'm not right, but I see this market changing as we speak, and we're sitting here November 2nd, 2023. And I see it changing to where there's more expireds coming out, at least in my market. And it's moving back to when we first started when I first got into it, 2013, 2014. And there was more expired homes in the market. The homes were taking longer to sell. And things that I did in the last 2-3 years where leads would just kind of flow in on their own based upon whatever lead source, home valuations, or they just call me if they're my past client or whatever. That's not happening as much anymore. So, no. And I'm not sure if you're noticing the same thing. So for me, it's like I'm starting to think, well, listen, that kind of thought process that I've been having of like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, or I'm not doing that anymore. Like I'm looking at those lead sources again and being like, hey, I had to start calling these. I'm not sure if you notice that too, and how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think over the last 3 to 4 years, it was easy. Like it was easier to do business there, especially right when COVID hit, because I think a lot of people just stopped in their tracks and didn't know what to do. Where the only thing I could do was what I knew, and so I was waking up and getting dressed in my suit and going to the office like things were as if. And I mean, I had a decent sized team back then. It was like 15 of us, and everybody left when COVID hit, and it was just me and 2 other people, and I lost my operations person. So my wife ended up joining the team, and she took over doing the transactions and listings. And with 3 people that year, we've crushed it. It was 2020, and then 2021 we crushed it. But I think what the problem with that is what happened was robo-dialing also became big. And so what I noticed was people weren't answering their phones as much. And then I also thought to myself, I think an age hit me. You reach that age where you're like, you wake up and you're saying, God, half my life's gone. I think maybe it was when I turned like 43, 44, or 42. I look back and I'm like, it's gone. Like I have like the next half if I'm lucky. And I thought about it. I'm like, I pretty much worked my life away, if that makes sense. Because a lot of it was, totally, like you said, prospecting. I would. Whenever I had a moment of what am I going to do next, and this was ingrained to me by one of my coaches. They always said, what's the highest and best use of your time? And so for me, the highest and best use of my time was to prospect. So I would prospect anywhere I could. At one time, I even hired a driver, because the biggest downtime that we have is driving to appointments and driving and showing properties. So I hired a driver that would drive me, and I would sit in the back and I would prospect on a laptop, and a Wi-Fi, a little Wi-Fi internet thing, mobile internet. And then I realized that people weren't answering their phone as much, and I was prospecting all day long in the morning. I would go all the way till 9 o'clock at night, and I wasn't getting the answers. So then I kind of backed off a little bit, and I started door knocking more and et cetera. But as of this year, because the market has changed dramatically here, and I'm sure for you as well, there's still little inventory, and the market's changed. So now I'm back to grinding hard, but now I'm implementing everything that I can. It's calling, texting, sending letters, videos, door knocking, what have you. But it's that season now where we have to get back to doing what we need to do so that we can go through this just crazy times in the world, down market in real estate, rising interest rates, and break through it so we can get to the other side.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so it's all the things that you've learned and we might have dropped or we might have put down for a moment. Now it's like picking them all the balls back up, throwing them in the air, and being like, hey, like this is like land, air, and sea. This is the way that we need to do it. Attack everywhere and to see what sticks. And that's the same thing that I'm seeing too. That's the same thing that I'm doing. It's just putting everything forward. All the lead sources that I called in the past, whether if they were like absentee, canceled listings, like even evictions, create everything. We're just making lists and we're calling them, see what's sticking, and trying everything. So I think that's good. So interesting. So I didn't realize that. So after COVID, so everybody left, and then from there, because I think COVID hit Illinois or the North a lot different politically than it hit us. So for us, everything was still open, and so.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, so, for us, I mean, everything shut down. Everything. You couldn't, if you were selling condos in downtown Chicago, you couldn't even go into the building because they locked out anybody that was a non-resident. So that market died, and then of course the crime went crazy, and that just kind of killed that market. In the suburbs, the homes were just all of a sudden flying off the shelves, and where there was, let's say 25 on average canceled expireds that would come off the market a day. I mean, we were lucky if we saw one or two in the areas of where things were selling. Now, if you looked at the downtown market, and if you looked at just like one building in particular where the average amount of condos that would be listed at one time, let's say 5 to 10, all of a sudden that shot up to like 30 to 40. I mean, it was nuts. And of course, nobody was selling, but everybody wanted to sell. So the inventory just went gargantuan, where most of the people left the city to go to the suburbs, and that market was so hot that there was nothing to find. So you really had to dig hard to be able to get through it with business.
How did you change the team after COVID? I mean, I know how you kind of how everything panned out during COVID, but how did it change after COVID? Are you still looking to build a team? I know that you recently made a brokerage switch, and you should probably talk some about that, but and why you made the switch. But
yeah, let's talk about
how are you seeing things now moving forward, and what's the plan? What's the big plan?
Well, it just like you and I are the type of people where we don't accept where we're at currently, right? We're always looking to progress, and so I did want to build a team just because we're at that age where we don't want to do this forever. And in order to be able to try and do other things in your life, and where you can exit one day, you have to build a team, and you have to build a team that's somewhat self-sufficient. So over the last couple of years, I've invested a lot into building on the EOS platform, Entrepreneur Operating System, read all the books first, and then actually consulted with an EOS coach. That coach came in, he met with my wife and I, because my wife still works with me, and we hired him. And so for the past year, or
that's not cheap either, right? That's not cheap.
No, it wasn't. It was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. I mean, one meeting with him was $5,000 for a day. So we met with him quite frequently for the first year. And what happened was, we made a lot of mistakes. Like we didn't have. I brought on a sales manager who wasn't the right person. He was the right fit for the company, but he just wasn't in the right seat. So he went back to being an agent. And as we tried to scale, just like any other company, you're trying to find talent, you're growing it. You get some people, you let go of some people. You get some people, you let go of some people. And it's very expensive. So what ended up happening shortly after that was we kind of took a break from using that consultant. And because we learned how to hold meetings and how to grow the company on our own, we just continued the process. And then due to a mutual friend that you and I have, he introduced me to somebody else that actually teaches real estate agents specifically how to scale their business. So then we started to talk to him, and we ended up using him to help us scale. And that made a big difference, because what we found out was that EOS is specifically for bigger companies, typically 20 million plus in revenue and a lot of maybe 40 plus people. And it just didn't, so we were doing it wrong, but it's good, because that's the only way to learn, is to do it and figure out that it wasn't working. So now we're doing it right. And we're still trying to scale, but we're doing it slow because we want to hire the right people. And I would say that the most important thing for us right now is we realize that we don't need a lot of people. We just need really good people. And so I did the math. If I have a team of 5 that are productive, I mean, that's pretty significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's really interesting, because I know I've been talking to, and I'm still wrestling with this too.
Yeah.
And you it sounds like you've been there too. It's like, so I have people that are, they've been on this podcast too. They have 45 agents on their team, and his philosophy is like, it's about headcount, and he just wants to grow his headcount, and he's going to have a really great training system. And once he can kind of have a really great training system and process through it, then it's just trying to just recruit. He's like, I'm just recruiting everybody that is interested. So about 90% of the people that want to join, I recruit. And then the people that I'm leaving off are just someone that's maybe a bad cultural fit. But and then I see the other side as like having like a special ops kind of team, where like you're just having killers, and like it's just people that are going in and just doing 20, 30 transactions a year, maybe more, 40, 50 transactions a year, and doing it that way. My verdict's out for me still. I don't know what's the right way. I in my opinion, I think we're just do a combination of both. Like, and I think this recruiting is just kind of like prospect. It's just kind of be a rotating system. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it.
No, you're right. One of the things that I found with just trying to get a lot of people and grow fast, because we were doing that, but to hire them on and train them. And then the biggest problem is that if you keep on hiring the wrong people and don't hire right, it actually hurts your culture, because you have some good people, and those good people are really working, and then you have these other people come in and they're like half-assing it, and they're not showing up to meetings, or you have role play sessions and they're not coming to those. And then what happens is maybe other people are like, oh, I guess it's okay not to show up. But it's not. And so it hurts the culture. So now we're really just hiring, same way EOS, we hire using our core values and the EWS, right? I think it's EWS or GWS. They get it, want it, and they have the capacity, or GWC, get it, they want it, and they have the capacity to do their job. But now if they don't match our core values, it's not even worth it, because I actually had someone on my team when we got into EOS, and he was good. He was good. He started off as an assistant, and he kind of stayed as an assistant, but then I started giving him a part of the deals, because at the time it was just me, him, and one other person who was a buyer's agent. So he was helping me out with all the listings, and he was showing them, and he was open houses. But I don't think he ever made the money that he made, and so it went to his head. And so what happened was he started getting an ego. I think it created a problem with our culture, because he thought he was hot stuff, when really the business was mine. He was just helping me to manage it. Mm-hmm. And so it was hurting the culture. So what I ended up doing was I just said, hey, let's just have you go on your own. You're a big shot, and I think you don't need me. And so I took him off my deal so he could do his own. Well, that obviously hit him in the face, because he realized that he wasn't a big deal, because all the deals were mine. He was just helping me with them. So he left. But that was a perfect example where you don't want someone to come in who has a big ego, because it creates a bad culture for the rest of the people that truly are, like, one of our core values is humbly confident. So they're confident, but they're humble. They don't have to show off. They don't have to act like a big shot, because nobody likes someone who is condescending or puts other people down because you think you're better than them just because you're making some money. It just doesn't work like that. And so,
it's toxic. It's toxic to an organization. Yeah, completely.
Yeah, super toxic. So that's why very careful with who we hire, but I agree with you. You do have to build the team, and we don't have that much time to do it. I would say we have about 10 years to get this going really top notch, because everything changes, like I would say 10 years ago, I was able to do a lot of business. My energy was different. I looked different. My whole family was different. And people don't realize that they don't have the time that they think they do, because they tend to think like, oh, I'm going to be working till I'm 65. But the problem is that it doesn't work like that, because once you get to your 40s, your energy changes, your focus changes, the things you value change. And, pretty soon I'm going to be in my 50s, and I know, I'm starting to get gray hair. I'm losing a lot of muscle. So like my confidence is wavering, right? So it messes with you. And that's why if anybody's watching this and you're like, oh, by the time I'm 40, I'm going to no, things change. Don't wait. Like, do everything you can today and utilize every minute that you have to build it, because by the time you're like, okay, I'm going to do it tomorrow, whatever, it's going to be too late. Typically the time that people make that decision is when it's too late.
Yeah. I had a podcast with a girl this morning, and she's 20 years old, and they're buying businesses in Atlanta. And she's like, it's awesome. She's like, I'm not buying any property right now, even though she's like knows completely how to just deal with foreclosures and lending money to flippers. She's like, I'm not buying any property right now because I'm just looking to grow my grow my influence on the people in my community, of people I know, and learn on how to do this. And she's like, she's incredible. I'm like, that's exactly what you need to do. You're in college, keep learning, just keep growing, keep learning. She's like, her goal is to make $1 billion a year. She's like, not $1 million a year. I was like, it's incredible.
That's amazing. I love hearing that. That's great.
Yeah. So, just kind of round this out. And so I know recently we both made the transition. So let's do two more things, because I had one thing in my mind that I want. So let's start here. Is there's a bit of recent change with real estate agents, obviously with this antitrust lawsuit that's came in. I know that I just saw something you posted online on a reel about it. I think it's something that just to talk about. I'm just curious from what you think of how it's going to change the real estate industry. If it's going to change it, it may not. But if you had to guess, foreshadow 5-10 years down the line, what changes will it have? What kind of effect will it have on our business?
Which one are you referring to? Because there's a lot of changes going on.
The antitrust, the Kansas lawsuit, the one I'm talking about, the compensation, competitive compensation.
Buyer's agent compensation. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Well, it's already affecting, like here. So I'll just name some companies like Redfin, for example. It's changing them. So I know here they've dropped out of the National Association of Realtors already, and I think here they can still have access to the MLS, but what they've also started doing was they're removing their salaried agents, or they're moving it in certain states. And that's a perfect example. And I'll give you a few more examples where probably what's going to start happening is if there's not a buyer's agent compensation offered, I think it's actually going to go back to kind of like the wild, wild west. Because if you look at the history of Marcus and Millichap, the commercial brokerage, for example,
yep.
There's books on them. Well, they're in books, I should say, on them. Maybe there is. But for example, there's a book called Tribal Leadership, and it specifically talks about them. And the reason that I bring them up is because the way they grew was in commercial real estate, you don't offer a co-op. You kind of have to negotiate that. Well, they kind of kept everything in-house. And so that's how that grew. If you wanted access, you had to join that brokerage. And so things started happening within that brokerage. I think that's a possibility where brokerages just won't offer buyer's agent compensation to anybody outside their brokerage. That's a possibility. A lot of agents are going to drop out of the industry for sure, because in order to sit down with a buyer and explain to them how things have changed and how compensation works now, I don't think they're going to get it unless you know how to add value. And I don't think a lot of realtors add value to their clients. I'm sure you get
Great.
that. The second thing,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
The second thing that I believe what's going to happen is that it's just going to dramatically change a lot of brokerages individually and how they do business. And I think I think what they're doing is so throughout history, we've had a good working system, right? Everybody knew what to expect going into it. I think people are not going to know what to expect. There's going to be a lot of chaos because for many reasons. I think there's going to be a chaos because agents are going to start really focusing on the ones that are offering a co-op commission. And that's part of the lawsuit was that agents would bring their buyers to the properties that were paying higher compensation. But what do you think is going to happen when there's no compensation offered? One property has no compensation. One property has So typically, yeah. So I think it's going to.
It really seems to me that. Yeah, it really seems to me that there's something behind this, a bigger force, right? It just feels that way. And I don't know, I'm not
isn't there always
about it, but
isn't there always?
Isn't there always, right? Isn't there always? And it also makes me think it's kind of silly. Like the whole thing is like we always talk about commission as one of the tools to use to sell a property. One of the tools that we're going to use to get someone to get the property and to pay the most amount of money for it. So like offering out no commission, sure, you can keep it in house. That's going to just do the seller disservice. So I mean, I think for me, it's going to boil down to how the market kind of dictates. I mean, again, if it's a hot market, you can get a buyer to pay some of the commission. But if it's not a hot market, shoot, you're gonna offer out a bonus and commission for it or whatever. So I think I don't know. I'm sure maybe it'll change in the ways that maybe I don't foresee it. But if we can disclose it and we can talk to the client about it, and if you're an agent, you need to learn how to. But if you can talk to the client about it, then I think I can't imagine things changing that much. I mean, I've already seen the MLS one of the MLS in our area talking about they're allowed to put $0 instead of $1. So they're making changes there. So
yeah, same here.
So cool.
I think that what's going to have to happen is listing agents are going to have to educate their seller, because I don't think it's smart for a seller not to offer a co-op commission. I think it's going to hurt them when things were working so well. To change it, it's going to hurt the sellers. And the whole lawsuit is saying that that the realtors and these brokerages are the ones that were steering clients, et cetera. But what's going to happen is I think that it's going to end up hurting the actual people who are looking to sell their property and the buyers. And what's probably also going to happen is you're going to see a lot of buyers going directly to the listing agents if that is the case.
Totally. Yeah.
Right.
Totally. I agree with that completely. So I don't want to take too much more of your time, but so we made a recent switch over to EXP. I'm just always curious. I made it as well. What were your thought process? I know you were with a brokerage for a long period of time, and I'm always curious why people make that transition. And people I think there's a lot of people out there thinking about making a transition or just wanting to, they hear all these things about EXP or why it's good and why so many people are moving. But someone from a high producer, someone closing 200 transactions every year, why did you guys make it, not just stay where you're at?
I never thought that I would leave the brokerage because they're a huge. I mean, they're a huge. They just grew so big as of recently because they bought Christie's International Realty, and it was a great company. The owners, it's privately held. Owners are the two owners that own it are just they're good guys. They built an incredible company. I have nothing but respect for them. My managing broker was incredible. I mean, they were just. It's a great company. I never thought that I would leave. I got a do not call list fine, and they kind of made it. They didn't make a big deal out of it, but they did. But the big deal wasn't made towards me. They just wanted to know. They see themselves as the 800-pound gorilla, which they are, and they've already had a couple class action lawsuits against them for things, and they just didn't want to have one for DNCs, right? And so they approached me to set up a meeting with like the owners and the CEO and my managing broker and the attorneys. And I was like, why are they why are they making such a big deal out of this? And so at the time they set up the meeting, there was 2 weeks until we met. So they set up a meeting for 2 weeks in advance. And then my mind started, a seed was planted. My mind started spinning, and I'm like, okay, they're probably going to handcuff me, say no more prospecting or something like that. And so I went to Aaron, who you and I work with, and I'm like, hey, I know that you went to EXP. Why'd you do it? And so then he's like, are you sure you want to know? I said, yeah. And he's like, are you thinking about changing? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right. And then he told me, and I was like, oh man, it sounds too good to be true. And then I told my wife, and her and I were, we scrubbed through the internet. We're looking for red flags. We couldn't find anything. And so then I went on to research some more. So then I started reaching out to past clients, and I was asking them, most of them, this question. If it was someone I knew, I asked them, like, how valuable did they think the brand was? And surprisingly, I think only one person was like, it has some value, but it's not the end all be all. 99% of the people were like, I hired you because I felt like I could trust you. One person said, wait a minute, what do you mean you're changing brokerages? And I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about changing. And they're like, don't you own the company? And I was like, no, I don't own this company. And they're like, well, you own Sohail Real Estate. And I said, well, that's my team. That's just a team within the brokerage. But within doing that, I realized a couple things. Number one, I realized that it's all smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, okay, when I did set appointments, I never called someone and said, I'm with XYZ company. And not once did they say, oh my God, come list my home. Never once. If anything, they were like, what's that company, right? I never got a lead from the company, like maybe some rent. I've never got a buyer or a seller lead. It didn't happen. I did everything on my own. And so that I thought to myself, and then by the way, with our team, we have all of our own systems. We have all of our own software. We have our own location. And so I thought to myself, man, I gave this company hundreds of thousands of dollars in 1 year. And I'm like, what am I getting out of it? And the reality is, it was just the name. It was just the name. And then I thought, okay, how much good faith does a name have? Well, it has some, but it didn't have enough to impact my business. And so what was happening was, as I looked at my numbers, I realized that I was giving them so much money. And then another problem, just as a specific example, was that brokerage would charge almost $500 when you list a property. And, a lot of people would ask the seller when they want an appointment for a check of $495. But the problem is, like you and I, if we're going on listing appointments and they're interviewing a couple different brokers, to ask someone for money up front, it just didn't sit well with me. Granted, we're fighting just to get our commission, right? And then to ask them to write a check up front is like, no, that's not happening. And then if the property doesn't sell, we either have to charge the client or I have to pay for it. Well, in the Midwest here, we're seasonal. So a lot of times around this time of the year, people will take their homes off the market. They plan to relist in spring. And if I was to say, okay, if you're going to cancel and take it off the market, I'm going to charge you $495, I probably won't be listing that next year. And so I would end up just paying for it. Well, think about this. If I'm listing 150 homes, let's say 100 sell and 50 don't. 50 times 500, do the math, right? And then I'm giving them my, they're getting a decent percentage off of my production. And then every time we had a buyer, we're paying them $200. There's a buyer's fee where they send them like some little things, but I would still end up buying my clients gifts. And so when you run the numbers and you look at the business, you start to become aware. Like you develop this awareness, And so then I became really aware that it's all smoke and mirrors. Because when I'm on a listing appointment, people hire me. Number one, they want to know a couple of different things. Number one, they want to know, can they trust you? That's the number one thing. Can they trust you? Number two is, are you a professional? Do you know how to market? Are you a great communicator? Can you get the property sold and can you get the results? That's all they care about. They don't say, oh, you know what? I'm going to hire you because you're at this company, but this other person who is a great communicator, now the presentation, they're not with that company, so I'm not going to hire them. No. I used to think like that. But then, the truth is, I wanted that to be the case, but it never was, right? And
you start to realize that like what the reality is of like this broker is just a back end for me to process paperwork, and then I think probably at least the way I see it. And then maybe there's some other stuff too, for at least what I'm looking at. And then you start to realize, like, and I think the neat part about EXP is that they kind of realize that. They realize that, and they position themselves and structure themselves accordingly, realizing, hey, look, let's put the agent forward, and you can, there's lots of different ways to make money off of, and we understand that you guys are doing all the work. We're just the guys processing the paperwork in the back end.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Well, not only that, but I look at this company, and the owners built a huge company, but when you look at who built it, it was really the agents built the brand. And as I left that company and started focusing on my own brand, I'm realizing now I get to build my own brand. So everything that I have is Sohail Real Estate rather than this brokerage, right? When you're using all the materials that the brokerage gives you, you're branding them. That's all you're doing. Even though it's free, but you're branding them. You're not really creating your own brand. And John, you and I know in today's world, how important is it for you to have your own brand? It's like everything. Because not only can you do real estate with it, if you want to start some ancillary businesses, you can do that. If you want to start a podcast, you can do that. Your personal brand becomes everything. And it's interesting because till this day, especially when I left, but people are like, why'd you leave? And I'm explaining this to them and they don't get it. And the ability to run your business with full autonomy, how you want to, is another big thing. Because at the other brokerage, they have minimum standards of things you have to do. You have to take this commission. You have to pay out this commission. You got to charge your client this. You got to do that. And I want to have control. I want to be able to control my business. I want to be able to run it the way that I think it's going to be most successful, the way that it's going to benefit the members of my team and everybody that works for me, and ultimately also how it's going to benefit my family, and in the long run, how I'm going to exit out of it, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So when you're
huge.
It's huge. And when you're with another brokerage, you don't have that many options.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think, and it's so interesting how people don't. It's not for everybody, but how people don't realize that people are the smoke and mirrors are. A lot of in our area, it's about the postcards that they send out or the whatever, and so but they don't get it, right? So, but that's okay. That's fine, and in time that will be potentially reveal itself, but it's fine. Well, cool. Well. So yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say one more thing, because this just happened recently, right? Every year I get an award or multiple awards, and it's like a certificate or a little glass,
sure,
award, like acrylic award. I got one this year from EXP, right? Because I did what's called Icon, where you cap out, and then what's amazing is I've gotten awards before, but this time not only did I get an award, but I got $8,000 in stock options. And then I did some training classes, so I got another $4,000, and I'm going to be getting another $4,000 soon. So it's almost unbelievable that a brokerage offers that, but they do. And I think that EXP is going to be the single biggest brokerage, because I don't think anybody can compete with all the benefits to the agents that they offer. And I'm surprised that more agents haven't already came over, but I think everybody's going to eventually come once they really understand the model.
That's right. Yeah. If you can, basically, if you hit that mark, then you get all of everything you paid in back.
Yep, exactly.
Stock. Right. Exactly. So it's you're basically not paying them anything.
Yes. And think about this, like that listing fee that was killing me, the $500. Well, I keep that now. The MLS fee, I keep that now. If it's a hot property and I know there's going to be multiple offers, like maybe I don't have to pay out 2.5%, because that's what most brokerages are the minimum standard. And we're talking buyer's agent compensation. If I'm thinking, okay, this property is going to have multiple offers in one day, and I've done all the work, all they got to do is show up, maybe I'll decide to pay a different commission out.
Yeah. $50,000, like you could pay for your kids' Harvard education, Yeah. $50,000,
Yes. Yeah.
Like, yeah. Well, Sohail, man, I love connecting with you, man. I'm so happy. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for accepting my invite. And I know that you add value here for everybody. And if someone wants to connect with you, is Instagram the best place, or how can they connect?
They can email me, It's Sohail, Sohail, Sohail at sohailrealestate.com. That's probably the easiest, or they can hit me up on Instagram or anything else. And I'm happy to help anybody that has questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the invite.
We'll talk to you soon. Absolutely.
All right, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.